Evgeny Kuznetsov admits to some tension in the past with Capitals coaches. Plus, the Detroit Red Wings look to get back to the playoffs, and the Arizona Coyotes kick off the NHL preseason down under in Melbourne. We've got all that and more on today's Locked On NHL podcast.
You're Locked On NHL, your daily podcast on the National Hockey League. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And welcome, everybody, to the Monday edition of the Locked On NHL podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I want to thank everyone who makes Locked On NHL your first listen every day. Don't forget to subscribe on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts so you can get new episodes as soon as they drop. And you can also find us on the SXM app on SiriusXM. Just do a search for Locked On NHL. The Washington Capitals in the news again, and whenever that happens, we bring in Dan Holmi of Locked On Capitals. Dan, great to have you here. And let's start off with some relatively new news. Talk to me about what's going on with Evgeny Kuznetsov.
So this just broke today that there's a podcast called Slippery Ice, and Evgeny Kuznetsov was on there, and he finally said, yes, I did say that I wanted out of DC. He actually had conversations with GM Brian McClellan a couple times saying that he wanted out. Why? Because he did not agree with Peter Laviolette's coaching style. Peter Laviolette was more of a dump and chase and then screen the goalie. He thought that the centers were underutilized, that, there was the Capitals had a myriad of injuries. And I think that was an easy excuse why they didn't play well. But he said that they had the manpower on the team to get it done. It's just that Peter Laviolette was not utilizing the players correctly. He talked about that for a lot of players that, getting a big paycheck is good enough for them, but not for him. He likes the big paycheck, but he wasn't happy. And that's why he was underperforming. And if you take a look at Kuznetsov, there's a lot of people throwing shade in his direction, but he was a first-round pick. And for the longest time on the Capitals, they always said, we need this really solid second-line center. Back then, Backstrom was the top-line center. And then came along Kuznetsov, this great guy from over in Russia that no one could say his name, this Kuznetsov guy. Well, he finally came over here and killed it for a couple years. And, he's a bit of a hot and cold player. He is a bit of a quirky guy. He's one of the guys that said, I could be the best player in the NHL if I wanted to be. I just don't want to put in the work. But I do believe that this is going to be the year for Evgeny Kuznetsov. I think he is engaged with Coach Spencer Carbery, and there is a lot of positivity surrounding Carbery, and most notably with Kuznetsov. I think that their philosophy is more on the same page, and now more I'm seeing the reason I believe that they did not trade Kuzi out of Washington is because I think that GM Brian McClellan knew that there was a disconnect between Kuzi and Peter Laviolette, and probably a lot of the other players as well. I think that, Peter Laviolette saw the writing on the walls, and he's like, I know what's going on here, and I want out of town. So good signs for Kuzi, good sign for the Capitals. I think that positivity and enthusiasm abounds.
Do you think, who are some of the other players who stayed healthy last year? Who do you think were negatively impacted by what Kuznetsov was describing?
He was talking about the center position in general. He thought that the centers were not properly utilized. He talked about Strome. He talked about Eller and Dowd, and that it's a veteran-laden team. And I know that a lot of the key veterans missed a lion's share of the season. I'm talking Wilson, Backstrom, Carlson. But I do think that there was the possibility that towards the end of the season that they could have made a push and made a wild card spot. They started on fire and they played so well in the month of December, and then the wheels fell off. Backstrom and Wilson came back and they actually played worse, if you can believe that. So I just think it was time, and I do think that the Capitals did have the manpower. If it wasn't on the big team, it would have been down in Hershey, as we see that the Hershey Bears won the Calder Cup. So evidently they're capable of handling themselves on a big stage. It's just more and more you're starting to hear this slowly trickle in from players, not so pointed as Evgeny Kuznetsov, but saying that there was a bit of a disconnect between Lavi and the rest of the other team. They weren't into his brand of hockey.
So now, when we've talked in the past, you've mentioned the promise that management made to Alexander Ovechkin, that as long as he was with the team, they were going to be all in to try to win another cup for him and be competitive, etc. Uh, Based on the new coaching situation and the new attitude here, do you think they can keep that promise this season?
I do. And, I'm totally drinking the Capitals Kool-Aid here, and I'm drunk on it. I mean, just as I watch camp here, it's nothing but positive interviews, something that I haven't seen, even before I hosted it for Locked On. I've covered this team or watched this team for many years. And, usually it's like, oh, we're doing the training camp and we got to do the skate test. But no, all the interviews with all the players, I'm talking Tom Wilson and Connor McMichael and Alex Ovechkin, everyone is super pumped to have Spencer Carbery here. He's young, relatively speaking, and I think that, he can relate more to the Capitals based on familiarity. He coached the Stingrays and the Hershey Bears, so he has familiarity even with a lot of the guys in the AHL. And I think that there is just a rapport with him and the other players and even the assistants. I just think that this is the makings of a perfect storm, if you will, for the Capitals that is trying to squeeze the most that they possibly can out of this aging roster, this rock the red era. I do think they can do it. I do think they can make it to the playoffs this year. I'm not going to go ahead and etch their name in the side of the Stanley Cup yet, but I do think they will make it to the playoffs.
One wild card, obviously, the health and performance of Max Pacioretty. Any updates on his situation, when they expect him back, and what he may add to the lineup?
So Brian McClellan was asked that, and he says, I don't have any word. He was receiving treatment when he was asked about it when camp opened up. He said he should have more details. But Max did come out and say that he's not going to be ready for game one of the regular season. And I've heard some things about November or potentially December. The tough thing about it is that he has suffered Achilles issues the last 2 seasons. And, we can see how that kind of plays out. If you don't know what I'm talking about, take a look at Rodgers for the Jets, for example, that it can be a bit difficult. And the reason that the Capitals were able to get Max in the first place was because he was a bit dinged up. I don't think the Capitals could have afforded him. A guy that has scored 30 goals 6 times in his career, no way. But I do think that when he comes, even if they can get a fraction of that, I mean, if he can get 30 goals, I mean, hey, I'm singing his praises. But even if he could score, let's say 20 goals, I definitely think that would help what ails the Capitals, as it was Alex Ovechkin who carried the bulk of the mail last year.
Yeah, 24th in goals, if I'm not mistaken, in the NHL. Very surprising for the Caps. Any prospects that we need to keep an eye on? Any young players who you expect to be fighting for a roster spot or even impacting this team this year?
Well, if you're an everydayer of Locked On Capitals, I will say that I do believe that this is going to be the year for Ivan Miroshnichenko. He was the player that had that non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, and Ross Mahoney, who was in charge, the assistant GM, said that, when he met Ivan, he was so skinny that the jeans were just hanging off his hips. But he put in the hard work in the offseason. He bulked up. He put on weight. He was able to terminate his contract with the KHL, and he was skating with Alex Ovechkin. Quite a thing there. I've often dubbed him as Alex Ovechkin 2.0. I don't want to get ahead of myself, but he looks pretty good setting up one-timers from Ovi's office. So I would keep an eye out for Ivan Miroshnichenko. I do think he'll make the Caps at some point. Another player that we've heard about for quite some time and has had a cup of coffee with the Capitals is Connor McMichael. I do believe that this is going to be his year as well. As he talked about in his interviews there, he said, obviously I can handle myself on the big stage. As the Hershey Bears won the Calder Cup. And the one thing I'm going to say about a lot of these young players is they are far more mature for their age than I was at their age. They're playing on the big team, and then they get sent down to the AHL. And for a lot of guys, you would sulk and you would moan. Not these guys. They just put in their effort. They didn't complain about it. And look at the proofs in the pudding there, as the Hershey Bears won a Calder Cup. And that's evident throughout a lot of the young players. Hendrix Lapierre and Ivan Miroshnichenko. There's no sulking that they're playing at a lower level. But in any event, I would say Connor McMichael and Ivan Miroshnichenko and perhaps Vincent Iorio on the blue line. It's a bit of a difficult position on the blue line, as it is a bit packed. I would pencil him as potentially a 7th defenseman. Of course, Alex Alexiev also fits in there. So I do think that it is going to be a battle. And I think that, it's not necessarily going to be set in stone. I'm going to say go ahead and write it in pencil with maybe a big eraser on there, because I think that things are going to be changing throughout the season. But it is exciting to finally have a coach that is going to be willing to work with the young players. There was always that reluctance with Peter Laviolette and previous coaches. So I'm pretty excited about this season.
All right, change in tone. Let's see if there's a change in results. Dan, why don't you tell our viewers and our listeners where they could find the podcast and where they could find you on social media?
All right, you can find me on Twitter. It's at DanCaps218. You can find the show on Twitter. It's at Locked On Caps. Of course, we're available wherever you can find your podcasts and on YouTube, including the SiriusXM app. So check it out.
All right, Dan, thanks so much. Always a pleasure.
Thank you.
Today's episode is brought to you by Jace Medical. Everyone should be empowered to care for themselves and their loved ones during the unexpected. That's why Jace Medical offers the Jace Case. The Jace Case provides 5 life-saving antibiotics for emergency use. It gives you a peace of mind so that you are not just hoping that you have access to medication in an emergency. Jace Medical makes sure you have the medication in hand. Jace Medical is simple. They handle everything from the online evaluation to licensed pharmacy medication delivery and ongoing consultation and care. So don't get caught unprepared. Get $20 off on these life-saving antibiotics today from Jace Medical by using my code LOCKEDON at checkout on jacemedical.com. That's JASE medical.com. Check it out. Preseason hockey is back. The Arizona Coyotes helped kick it off down under. Robyn Leano of Locked On Coyotes joining us to talk about that. And Robyn, let's first talk about what this trip has been like for this team and what it's meant for the NHL and for the Coyotes.
Yeah, it's absolutely huge. I believe the first NHL game in the southern hemisphere. There's been a lot of Global Series games across Europe, across Asia, but the first in the southern hemisphere. So, they're pretty excited for it. And from what my understanding was, a lot of Coyotes fans actually made the trip down there too, and also Kings fans as well. But there was so much anticipation for it, especially because it's Australia. It's a tourist destination. People love to be there. So it was a pretty cool experience, especially seeing everything that, all the anticipation that led up to it.
And as far as this team is concerned, I mean, it's got to be a great bonding opportunity to start the season off by having the team head over to Australia. I mean, it's certainly not your typical training camp start of the preseason kind of a thing.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I think there is because normally everyone's doing training camp, in their own home, and some of the team still is. It's a split squad, right? But this is the team that went to Australia, the team that we already know has like a 99% chance of being on the opening night roster. So the fact that they were able to go and bond and have those kind of experiences on the global stage, I think it really made a difference. It really does. And I think that's, for a team that's coming out of a rebuild, I really think that's one of the most important things you can get.
Now, there were a few issues with the ice as far as practice goes. I know in the days leading up to the first game, but somehow maybe that even helps the team bond even more.
Oh yeah, it's pretty funny. I was watching the everything that went down, and there was oh yeah, no, there's issues going on at Rod Laver Arena, so they're gonna go practice back at the O'Brien ice house, and it's just oh my god, they're just going back and forth. I'm sure on the bus between the facilities, they're just laughing. They're just probably just laughing because it's funny because that happens. I mean, that in a place where it gets that hot, I'm pretty sure they understand. I'm sure it's probably happened maybe once or twice in an Arizona ice facility. Maybe not while they're practicing, but it's nothing new.
And it amazed me looking at the schedule. The Coyotes actually on Saturday playing 3 different split squad games.
Yeah.
Is that a first in NHL preseason history?
I have never seen anything like that before. And it's interesting too, because leading into that, I think the Coyotes signed 12 players to a PTO just so they could, field full team, ice full teams for those split squads. Like I said, the team that went to Australia is a team that practically is like a shoe-in for the opening night roster. The team that's going to Wichita tonight, I believe, has. I think they're probably the ones that are fighting for a roster spot, seeing if they can, push in, maybe make the final couple spots. Then you got the team, and it's just going to St. Louis, where like they're just, I think they're just there for a little bit of the extra reps.
Logan Cooley with a spectacular play in the first game. Talk to me about his progress and about that move and that goal.
Logan Cooley has just been the one we've been waiting for. Ever since he was drafted, I've been hyping this dude up. I've been watching his highlights, watching him closely when I was playing in Minnesota. So when we found out he signed his contract, I'm like, all right, watch for these kind of plays. He's gonna do so well. And then in the first preseason game, he does it. He does those like a spinorama, duke out the Kings, and I'm like, oh my god, is this what we're gonna keep getting? I'm gonna love this. This is gonna be so good. Logan Cooley, I really want to stress. I cannot stress this enough. That I really believe that Logan Cooley is, definitely going to be like, top 3. Everyone's paying attention to in rookies in this upcoming year.
And what are the realistic expectations from him as a rookie this year, as far as you're concerned?
I mean, I wouldn't put it as I'd probably go as far as saying like, look, probably looking to see if he can chase for that Calder Trophy. I think that's kind of an actual realistic expectation. I know a lot of hockey fans out there are going to be touting for Connor Bedard and Connor Bedard, but I know unlike him, he's got a better support. Logan Cooley's got a little bit of a better support team around him to be able to make sure he helps get that development and just look outstanding.
Any other young players? I mean, like you said, the Coyotes coming out of a rebuild here. Some other young players you think that our listeners and viewers should keep an eye on in Coyotes camp this year?
Yeah, I think I think of just 2 players really, and these are 2 players who made a big impact last year, who I really believe are going to increase and have a bigger impact this year. And that's defenseman JJ Mosier, who as well as Matthias Pacelli, the forward. He came I believe he should have gotten at least more votes for the Calder Trophy last year, having the most points per game than any other rookie in the league last year. I just think he's going to build off of that.
Well, should be interesting to see, and hopefully the Coyotes take another step forward as they hope to get back to contention. Robyn, why don't you tell our viewers and our listeners where they could find the podcast and where they could find you on social media?
Yeah, you can find the podcast wherever you get your podcast, from Apple Podcast, Google Podcast, Spotify, Stitcher. We're also on the Sirius XM radio app. All you gotta do is just search up Locked On Coyotes. On social media, we're on Facebook, facebook.com/LockedOnCoyotes, and on X at LO_Coyotes. And I'm at Robyn_Laionio.
All right, Robyn, always a pleasure. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Of course, thanks, Gil.
Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Snap into action this NFL season with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Right now, new customers get $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place a $5 bet. That's $200 in bonus bets, win or lose. If you've been thinking about joining FanDuel, there's no better time to get in on the action. The app is so easy to use. There's a wide range of betting options, including point spreads, player props, over-unders, and more. And hey, it's not just the NFL you could bet on. You've got the Major League Baseball playoffs right around the corner, and NHL futures are available right now. You can use your knowledge of the NHL at FanDuel. So visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and kick off the NFL season and more. FanDuel, official partner of the National Football League. It is great to welcome back to the show Brian Fisher of Locked On Red Wings. An exciting time in Detroit right now, and a lot of it centers around the addition during the offseason of Alex DeBrincat. What exactly is he going to bring? I mean, I'm sure there's a ripple effect with DeBrincat's addition. What does he bring to the table for this team?
Well, the number one thing that he brings to the team is goals. On the Detroit Red Wings last year, Dylan Larkin led the team in points. He had 79 points in 80 games played, a point-per-game player, but only player on the team to hit 30 goals. After that, it was David Perron with 24 and 56 points. Dominic Kubalik, who we traded to the Senators for DeBrincat, with 20 goals and 45 points. Like, there's very clearly a large gap between Dylan Larkin and the rest of the group of the Detroit Red Wings. And there's been a lot of roster turnover altogether. In this offseason, he addressed Steve Yzerman addressed a lot of goal scoring different ways, bringing in Daniel Sprong, hoping he's not a flash in the pan, and can bring us a 20-goal season yet again, as he did with Seattle last year. But Alex DeBrincat, number one, he addresses goals. This team, that was their, well, I want to say it was their biggest issue, but they had a lot of things going wrong with them last year, like goaltending and defensive core, but which was also addressed. But when Scotty and I talk about the biggest issues that needed to be addressed, like, you're not going to win hockey games unless you put the puck in the back of the net. And the Red Wings didn't do a whole lot of that last year. So if Alex DeBrincat, even if he was, because last year was a down year for DeBrincat with the Ottawa Senators, I think he had 66 points, 27 goals after having like 41 goals with the Chicago Blackhawks the year before. 66 points would still comfortably put him second best on the team points. And we're hoping for even more of that. We're hoping that he bounces back and gets back to like Chicago Blackhawks style Alex DeBrincat. So to bring him in, Scotty and I talked about it. If you take this Red Wings team from last year and you add DeBrincat's 30 goals, then that takes them from a bottom 10 team goals for to a top 12 team in goals for. And I understand, obviously, you lost like DeBrincat, who, provided 20 goals. So you do the math there, but then you brought in other guys who hopefully can supplement that. The scoring goals is such a important thing. And that's like the number one thing that DeBrincat's gonna bring. And that's what you brought him in to do.
One of the keys, obviously, for DeBrincat's success is who he plays with, who are his line mates. And, you mentioned Dylan Larkin. Any early indications so far in training camp about the chemistry between these two?
Well, so Derek Lalonde on day one of training camp, obviously it's training camp, so they've shaken it up every single day here. But on day one, the line that Dylan Larkin was on was with Raymond and DeBrincat. Now, in the offseason, I was a little bit skeptical that Raymond and DeBrincat would play on the same line with Dylan Larkin because they're kind of, I won't say they're the same type of player, but they're both undersized for NHL standards, wingers. And DeBrincat plays above his size. Like, he plays bigger than he is, but that doesn't still make up for the fact that he's a little bit smaller. I think he's 5'9", maybe even 5'8" officially is what he's listed at. So, I was a little skeptical that they might get bullied and then it wouldn't provide a lot of great chemistry. But if you look at their pros as well, obviously DeBrincat being a huge goal scorer, he gets a fair amount of assists. Dylan Larkin can shoot and he can pass. And Lucas Raymond can do the same thing. So you think, like, when it comes to goal scoring ability and setup ability, that would be a great line. I was just skeptical because of their size. I know Derek Lalonde in a press conference said that he thought Raymond and Fabry had some phenomenal chemistry. And I was predicting that Raymond would end up on the second line. One, because he's still a growing player. Putting him on the second line still gives him quality minutes, but gives him a little bit more room to breathe and grow. And then also David Perron could bump up. I know he usually plays off wing like DeBrincat does on that left side. But you put him on the right side, he's that guy who can get into the corner like Tyler Bertuzzi did for the Detroit Red Wings and will now do with the Toronto Maple Leafs. He's the guy who can get in the corner, dig that puck out, and set up his goal-scoring teammates in Larkin and DeBrincat. David Perron does the same thing, plus the added benefit of he is a shooter. David Perron can score. He's a power play wizard. So I really like the idea of Larkin, DeBrincat, and Perron. I'm not opposed to Larkin, DeBrincat, and Raymond either, if that's what's best for the team. But I think Larkin and DeBrincat is I don't say set in stone because we haven't seen a game yet of them being played, but they're both top line caliber players.
Yeah, and it'll be interesting to see what the chemistry that develops between them is. You mentioned briefly Daniel Sprong. Talk to me about some of the other newcomers on this team.
Oh, I mean, we'd be here for half an hour if I talked about every single one of them. So yeah, Daniel Sprong had a great season last year with the Seattle Kraken. I believe he had 21 goals with them last year, despite playing third and fourth line minutes. He's going to come here with the opportunity of the Red Wings to try and get into a top 6 role, middle 6 probably. I don't see him playing fourth line, but that is a huge add for the Detroit Red Wings depth, because last year, once you got outside the top 6, there wasn't much offense to be had. And you look at teams like the Vegas Golden Knights, and granted, they are star-studded too, but they didn't have a lot of, like, I think the top point getter was in the 60s as well. They were just a really deep team. All 4 lines contributed, and that's how you have success in the NHL, is when you're 4 lines deep. So Daniel Sprong, if he's not a flash in the pan and he can provide, 20 goals again from the second or third line, that provides a ton of depth, offense, and scoring. And again, I talk about pressure. It takes pressure off the top 6 to do everything all the time. It makes every single line a threat and keeps other teams on notice that you can't just, okay, well, we're against the third line, so, you can take it a little bit easier. Oh, this guy's a threat. He's going to be a threat to score. JT Compher, I'm not in love with the dollar amount that they gave him. I think 5x5 is a little much for JT Compher, but I understand free agency. That's what's going to happen. You're going to overpay for free agency every single time. But I love that he's a two-way forward. He's a special teams guy too. He had a career year last year, much like Andrew Kopp did the last year or the year prior as well. The only difference is he's not coming off a core muscle surgery, so he should be able to get off the ground running coming into the new season. Andrew Kopp, it took him a little while to get used to things because he didn't have a training camp. He started his first time back on the ice was essentially game 1 of the NHL season last year, so he was sluggish to begin. So you have 2 guys in Andrew Kopp and JT Compher who can both play 2C. They're going to be battling it out for 2C all year long. They're going to have great chemistry. And then there's tons of other guys too. Christian Fischer, Klim Kostin are going to bring an edge that this team needs. Christian Fischer being a PK specialist, Klim Kostin being huge and intimidating. They need that on the forward core because they got bullied a lot last year because they didn't have any grit really. Defensively, Justin Hall, I think he's a little bit of a martyr, a little bit of a scapegoat in Toronto. He was awful in the playoffs. Won't make any excuses for that. Another player I'm not really happy with the dollar amount they gave him. But again, I understand free agency. He'll play second pair, third pair minutes with the Detroit Red Wings. I think he'll do just fine. He's definitely an upgrade over everyone else. Gostisbehere brings that offensive punch on the blue line that they lost when they traded Hronek away. And plus, it's a 1-year deal. So if this team's out of it come the playoffs and he's having a good year, you flip him at the deadline for more assets. I really love I can't undersell how much I love the Gostisbehere acquisition. I just, trying to keep things timely here because the Red Wings made like 10 acquisitions. Jeff Petrie on the right side. They traded for him for next to nothing. I love that veteran presence. He comes home and gives him something to play for, finish out his career with his hometown team. If you look at the advanced metrics, he's still a quality defenseman on the right side, despite the fact that he's 35. Obviously, we're going to expect a little bit of a dip in play, but he's not going to be getting top pair minutes like he used to either. So he should still be strong with less minutes. So I'm trying to think who else. James Reimer, Alex Lyon. That's still the biggest question mark with the Detroit Red Wings. The James Reimer James Reimer last season with the San Jose Sharks had a down year, but the San Jose Sharks were also abysmal last year. So if you look at James Reimer's career stats, every single season of his career, besides last year, he's had over a 900 save percentage. I think he bounces back to that and is a quality backup to Ville Husso, who I also think will bounce back now that he's not injured, got a year of being the number 1 guy under his belt, and has a quality backup behind him because there was a lot of pressure on him last year when Magnus Hellberg and Alex Nedeljkovic didn't pan out. So I think James Reimer bounces back. He might not be the way he used to be because he's 35 to plus. But then Alex Lyon, if everything goes bad, you have Alex Lyon in the minors who can step up. Now, that's the my quick version of everyone the Red Wings brought in.
So briefly, is that all of these new additions, is that going to be enough to get this team into the playoffs in a very competitive conference and division?
I don't know. To put it bluntly, Gil, I don't know. This is a incredibly deep division, and I hate it because of that. This team on paper is so much better than they were last year, but you look at teams that they're playing against, like the Ottawa Senators, who have a fantastic roster. I mean, I won't sell them short. Guys like Stutzla, Brady, Norris, Sanderson. They're just up and down their roster. They got so much talent. I think their head coaching is what's keeping them back. They keep running it back with DJ Smith. I don't know what the deal is with that, but they're poised to take a step forward every single year. They just have really failed to get that final leap into the playoffs. Buffalo Sabres proved to be really scary on offense and really abysmal on defense, missing the playoffs by 1 point. So they're very much in the conversation. Boston is going to not get 135 points, but I wouldn't be surprised if they get 100 again because they still have Marchand, they still have Pasternak, they still have DeBrusque, they still have McAvoy. They have the best goalie tandem in the league in Swayman and Olmark. Tampa Bay is still Tampa Bay. They're just another year older. Toronto is still Toronto. They're just another year older, and they brought in a lot of like gritty guys in the offseason. I mean, Florida is right there. It's just the only team I'm not really concerned about is Montreal, and I think in the next couple of years you will be concerned with them because they have a great prospect pool. So I hate to sound like a cop out, but I don't know. I could see this. I think this team is going to compete until the very end, but I don't think I can't tell you right here, right now. I can guarantee they make the playoffs. I think my minimum for success is they just barely miss the playoffs. That's my minimum for a success. My overwhelming success would you make the playoffs.
Right. All right, Brian, why don't you tell our viewers and our listeners where they could find the podcast and where they could find you on social media?
Well, you can find Locked On Red Wings on YouTube, Spotify, Apple, Odyssey, the Odyssey app. I got to plug that because I work for an Odyssey radio station. And you can also find me on Twitter at Brian Fisher WWJ. The team, the podcast account is at LO_Red Wings. And then my co-host is at Bentley Scotty.
All right, Brian, thanks so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me. Appreciate it, Gil.
All right, I want to thank my guest, Brian Fisher of Locked On Red Wings, Robyn Leano of Locked On Coyotes, and Dan Holmi of Locked On Capitals. I'm Gil Martin. I host the Monday edition of Locked On NHL, and I co-host the Friday edition along with Rachel Donner. I want to thank everyone for making Locked On NHL your first listen every day. Everydayers, tomorrow on the show, we will have more of the biggest stories from around the NHL, which we do every Monday through Friday right here on the Locked On NHL podcast. Have a great day, everybody. Stay safe, and thanks for listening to the Locked On NHL podcast.